Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing a full system failure analysis of HTTP/1.1. We're going to see exactly how trying to solve early web performance issues accidentally engineered some of the most severe bottlenecks and critical security vulnerabilities that are literally still haunting networks today.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with the need for speed. Look at the pipelining pitfall, how we define message boundaries, what happens when framing mechanisms conflict, dive deep into HTTP request smuggling, and wrap up with securing the modern web.
Okay, Section 1, the need for speed and why persistent connections were born.
Back in the early days of the web, developers faced a massive latency penalty. Why? Because you had to open a brand new TCP connection for every single HTTP 1.0 request. Think about it. If a web page had 10 images, your browser had to set up and tear down 10 completely separate connections. It was a nightmare for bandwidth and totally exhausted server resources. But that brings up a really crucial question. If a TCP connection never closes, how does the server actually know when an HTTP message ends? That simple question introduces a severe tracking and synchronization risk that completely changed the web's architecture.
The answer to that connection problem was persistent connections, often called keep alive. By keeping the TCP socket open and reusing it for multiple requests, we completely bypass that agonizingly slow TCP three-way handshake. A new handshake eats up a whole round-trip time before a single byte of HTTP data is even sent. So, by keeping connections alive by default, HTTP 1.1 saved a ton of server CPU and massively cut down network latency.
Just look at how this plays out on the timeline. Avoiding those repeated handshakes means subsequent requests get to ride on a warmed-up TCP connection. Whenever a new connection starts, it goes through a slow start phase, basically tiptoeing onto the network with a tiny initial congestion window. Reusing the connection means you keep that established, much larger congestion window. It's an absolute game changer for bandwidth utilization.
Which brings us to Section 2, the pipelining pitfall, or when request queuing goes completely wrong.
This is a huge focus for us today. We have to look at the first major attempt to maximize those persistent connections and exactly why it fell apart structurally. HTTP pipelining sounded incredible on paper, right? Just send all your requests back to back without waiting for responses. But here is the catch. HTTP 1.1 strictly requires servers to return responses in the exact order they were received. So if you have one really slow database query at the front of the line, it blocks the entire pipeline. Every single subsequent response, no matter how tiny, is stuck waiting. We call this application layer head-of-line blocking, and it absolutely choked network performance.
It got so bad that pipelining was ultimately deemed a massive failure. You had unpredictable middleboxes out there, like old routers and corporate proxies, that completely mishandled these pipeline requests, causing bizarre and erratic behaviors developers couldn't even predict. Because of this devastating front-of-queue blocking, pipelining was actually disabled by default in modern browsers like Chrome and Firefox.
So, what did developers do? They had to scramble. To work around this pitfall, browsers were forced to just brute force it, opening up to 6 parallel TCP connections per origin. They traded the elegance of reusing a single connection for raw, inefficient concurrency. Developers even resorted to messy hacks like domain sharding, literally splitting resources across multiple subdomains just to trick the browser into opening more connections, or using CSS sprites, all just to get assets to load at the same time.
All right, moving into Section 3, defining message boundaries and the mechanics of framing data over open connections.
If a connection is going to stay open indefinitely, it is absolutely critical that both the client and the server agree on exactly where one request ends and the next one begins. Now, HTTP/1.1 relies heavily on text-based parsing. Specific headers, like the host header you see here, act as the routing mechanism to tell the server where to send the request. But here's the flaw. Relying on plain text headers for something as critical as routing makes them a massive target for manipulation by bad actors who want to poison shared caches.
And that brings us to how the protocol actually handles message framing. It essentially has two completely distinct ways of doing this. First, you have content length, which uses an exact byte count. That's perfect for static files where you know the size up front. But for dynamically generated content, we use something called transfer-encoding/chunked. In this case, the server streams content in discrete chunks, each prefixed by its size in hexadecimal and ending with a zero-length chunk. It is a really clever workaround for streaming, but having two competing systems for measuring length, that is practically inviting disaster.
Which leads us straight into Section 4, conflicting framing mechanisms in the architectural vulnerability of dual headers.
This right here is the core of our security focus today. Having two perfectly valid but completely different ways to dictate the length of a message creates a super dangerous ambiguity. What happens if an attacker sends both headers at the exact same time? Well, if a front-end proxy and a back-end server disagree on where a request actually ends, a malicious payload can be seamlessly smuggled right past your security filters. This is HTTP request smuggling. It directly exploits the very foundation of how non-compliant text requests are interpreted by different machines.
Let's look at this in Section 5, HTTP request smuggling, specifically CL.TE and TE.CL attacks in action.
Let's break down the actual mechanics of these desynchronization attacks. In a CLT attack, the attacker sends conflicting headers. The front-end proxy prioritizes the content length header, so it grabs the entire payload and forwards it. But the back-end server, it prioritizes transfer-encoding, so it starts reading the chunks, and it hits a zero-length chunk that the attacker deliberately planted early in the payload, and it just stops reading. It mistakenly treats the leftover, smuggled bytes sitting in the queue as the start of the very next innocent user's HTTP request.
On the flip side, a TECL attack reverses that logic entirely. The front end assumes the request is chunked, reads that first chunk, and forwards it. But the back end is prioritizing content length, so it's expecting a massive payload based on the fake header. It ends up just hanging there, waiting for data that is never going to arrive, which completely poisons the connection state for whoever happens to share that persistent TCP socket next.
Now, these are not just theoretical bugs. The real-world impact is absolutely devastating. By exploiting these conflicting headers and unkeyed inputs, attackers can literally turn your caching infrastructure into a direct exploit delivery system. We're talking about bypassing web application firewalls entirely, poisoning caches with malicious responses, and even hijacking credentials by piggybacking a smuggled payload onto a valid user's session, all without the user interacting with a single suspicious thing. It is wild.
So how do we actually fix this? Section 6, Securing the Modern Web and Resolving the Tensions of HTTP/1.1.
Thankfully, the standard has been aggressively updated to rip out this ambiguity. Under the strict normalization rules of RFC 9112, if both headers are present, transfer encoding takes absolute precedence, no questions asked. And the content length header must be completely ignored and stripped out to prevent smuggling entirely.
To protect your architecture today, you have got to align how your load balancers and back-end servers interpret these headers. You need to normalize ambiguous requests at the front end and deploy a WAF to heavily sanitize traffic. Honestly, if you can't guarantee consistent interpretation across your entire stack, you might have to disable connection reuse entirely just to stay safe.
And this whole saga is exactly why the web had to evolve. HTTP/2 and HTTP/3 throw chunked encoding entirely in the trash in favor of explicit, native binary data frames. By getting rid of ambiguous text-based headers and introducing true concurrent multiplexing, these modern protocols permanently solve both the application layer head-of-line blocking and those dangerous message framing ambiguities of HTTP/1.1.
But I want to leave you with a rather chilling reality. While the public-facing edge of the web has largely upgraded, HTTP 1.1 remains the universal fallback. It's still heavily used by corporate proxies, internal microservices, and legacy appliances. This means that this structural flaw might still be quietly lurking deep inside your internal network, just waiting for the right conflicting header to come along. So I have to ask, even with HTTP 2 at the edge, are your legacy internal HTTP 1.1 proxies silently passing smuggled requests straight to your backend?